Welcome to Success Authorities Conversation Street with Leadership Authority Peter Beaumont and with Business Culture Authority Ronn Lehmann and me, Linda Ruhland, Success Authorities founder.
There's some people that are a lot more intentional and start things with a plan that they want to grow a bigger company. Takes probably both a certain amount of maybe experience and mindset to start with, or parents that have helped get the ball rolling, so you're not starting at home plate, that you're already on second or third base.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Or out. So, Dave, this is the guy we were telling you about.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. I hate to think what it was that you were talking about.
We'll press on. It'll come up, I'm sure.
So what I'd like to do first, Dave, is you to give Peter and Ron, especially a brief bio, how you arrived where you are today and what you're doing today versus how you got into business in the first place. And we'll keep it short and sweet so we can move into the meaty questions and conversations that this episode's going to fulfill.
Okay, great. Yeah. I guess I was fortunate to grow up on a farm, so and my dad approached things more from a business standpoint, whether I realized it at the time or not. I was one of seven, so he and the oldest, so he persuaded us that farming wasn't the best option. So I have got a mechanical engineering degree, but pretty quickly moved into the business side by getting an MBA. Worked at the GM financial staff for probably 3 or 4 years, enough to see there might be some issues there that weren't being attended to. Was fortunate that I had a connection with Hewlett Packard and basically used that connection and found an opening in San Diego at one of their divisions that actually had some value on mechanical engineering. Spent close to 10 years there with a division that provided initially it was pen plotters, but then grew into more raster devices for computer-aided design systems. So it was HP was a great company, but my wife and I wanted to return to the Midwest to raise our kids in civilization, as I tell people. So we moved back to the Midwest and ended up settling in Indiana, where we owned the largest independent bookstore in Indiana for about 10 years. Concluded competing with Amazon wasn't the best long-term strategy. So I moved into the merger and acquisition world and have done that the last 20 years now.
But Dave, when people come to you to talk about a possible merger acquisition, what are the driving forces that bring them to that decision that they need to get your help?
Okay. There are two groups I work with. One are those that are looking to sell, and those are typically older owners that might be in their 50s, but more likely in their 60s or maybe even early 70s, and conclude that it's time to move on. Often, if they're easily half of businesses are family businesses, but often the kids aren't interested in mom and dad's business for a long list of reasons. The other group I work with, they're younger owners, probably in the 45, maybe 50 age group, that are looking to grow partially by acquisition. They have the benefit of probably having 20 years to benefit from an acquisition before they move into that first group, potentially looking to sell or possibly having their kids get involved.
Mm-hmm. And when these clients come to you, how do you describe the differences? If they come to you and say, well, we need a growth strategy, how do you describe the differences between or the opportunities between a merger versus an acquisition?
Most of what I'm doing, I would call probably an acquisition, that there's one clear buyer that's buying the company, and typically the prior owner is looking to exit. So what I do would be 99% falls into the acquisition category. A merger kind of implies a joining of equals, and I can't think of a case where I've actually been involved with that. So it's all on the acquisition side.
Those numbers are probably fairly close to reality, even when organizations call it a merger. There's almost always one group that's a little bit more equal than the other. And what may be portrayed as a merger usually ends up looking more like an acquisition.
Yeah, it's hard to have more than one chief in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Unless it's a much bigger organization where there's room for that, or something is going to operate maybe as almost a separate subsidiary, that lends itself. But if they're very closely tied together, typically one group is going to kind of win out over the other, and not through any necessarily malicious intent, but just kind of through the reality that people are more comfortable with those that they know the best. And
Dave, how often when you do evaluation for a company, do the owners meet you with some surprise in terms of what you project or calculate versus what they thought their company was worth?
That's a good question. I haven't necessarily thought of a percentage, but part of what I try to do is educate the owners to show them how the evaluation is developed, so they understand that this isn't just a number pulled out of the air, but it's based on what's there are a couple different metrics. There can be a sales metric, but the more useful ones are profit based. So basically, this is I compare it to activity versus accomplishment. Profit is the accomplishment, and it's important that it be sustained. Buyers, the perception of risk is vastly different whether you're a buyer or a seller. A seller sees no risk at all. A buyer often can see all kinds of risk. So helping the seller understand, this is what my business looks like from a financial perspective, that we've either consistently gone up or we've bounced up and down. So the direction may not be as clear. So first helping them see that, and then I use a database that has about 40,000 sales transactions, and narrow it down to their industry and their size of company to help them see, it's kind of like doing comparables on home sales, saying, these are all the houses like yours, and this is what they sold for. So that I found that helps a lot, that if the owners kind of understand, this is the basis. But there's still there's the standing joke that with the owners that see all the potential that, a new owner could do all these things. For the buyer, or those of us that are helping with selling the business, the thought always crosses our mind, if it was so easy to do, then you should have done it and you would have gotten benefit from it. Again, it's always easier to think you can do certain things than to actually accomplish those.
Where people approach you, are they really in the right mindset to move a company forward? And how do you bring them along with that process, or even determine if they're ready to sell? I'm wondering even if they always are. Okay.
Well, one good sign is if they're crying in my office, they're probably not ready to sell, which has happened a few times. One helpful thing is if the seller has thought through, what is it that I want to do in the next stage of my life, whether it's grandkids or traveling. For those that want to play golf, that usually lasts for a month or two maybe, and they get bored. But if someone's done some serious thinking, Sometimes people have had health issues, and it dawns on them that I'm not actually going to live forever. Many owners don't necessarily come to that realization. But if someone has thought through what they want to do next so that they're going to something versus just leaving, what they may have spent 20 or 30 years doing, that makes me a lot more confident that that they're really going to move ahead and not get a good offer and then decide, well, I don't really want to sell. Part of my job is to not waste other people's time by making sure that the seller really is at that point, and that that they've also talked to the other people that get impacted by the sale, whether it's their spouse or other family members, whatever. You want everyone on the same page and ready to move ahead.
And to a certain extent, the employees too, I would imagine, because tend to be a lot of fear in those situations that sometimes is fact-based and sometimes isn't.
Yeah, the challenge with employees, they remember all the bad stories they've heard. So with the size deals that I do, usually it's best not to inform the employees until things are pretty much done. Typically, there might be a couple higher level people that are important to the transaction, but it's really hard to reinsure the employees that, hey, everything's going to be wonderful, because they remember all the stories they've heard from their buddies that, such and such company got sold and they were told that everyone would have a job, and that's not what happened. Even though those might be the minority of cases, those are the situations that get talked about by far the most. And in some ways, it's almost unfair to the employees because the deal isn't done until it's done. There are all kinds of issues that can come up that can derail something that looks like it's should be smooth sailing. There can be financing issues, or something's changed in the business, or the buyers had a change in their situation. So in general, most of the deals I'm involved with, I strongly advise the sellers not to talk to the employees until something's really definitive. And it's also important to ideally have the buyer be one of the first parties that talk to the employees as well. And everything that they, all their actions are much more important than their words to reinforce that.
Yeah, it's
So, Dave, you talked about two groups. Group one being looking to sell. They're probably older, probably got into it, as we call it, as a lifestyle business, as opposed to legacy. Probably they've just carried on doing it because that's what they're good at and they enjoy. No real strategy for exit, but suddenly it's like, oh. So whereas your second group, far more around legacy building, growing. Do you find that they've worked out that they're going to purchase based on what they're already doing, so vertically integrate, if you like, or are they trying to diversify? As a percentage, where do they fall normally?
With those that I work with, the vast majority are kind of staying within the related areas. They might be adding a slightly different business, but it's related to what they're doing. One good example, I was working with a manufacturing company and they didn't really do stamping, so they bought a smaller company that had presses and stamp pieces out. That way they were able to add that to they did a lot of welding and CNC work and other things that wasn't stamping related. So the majority would fall into that. The other area is to geographically expand by doing exactly the same thing, but perhaps having another location 100 miles further away.
Right. So they would acquire another company in another area, use their expertise, and
right.
correct. Yeah.
As a way maybe of serving, maybe they have a big customer in that area and there's some other bigger customers there. So that would give them a better base, or they need more space with where they're at their original location. So there's part of a strategic plan saying, well, we could expand here, but if we buy another location, and there's very few things are always 100% plus one way. So you have to weigh the pros and cons if you're doing that.
Do you have a checklist for them? Like, have you thought about this, or do they come fairly well prepared with their own?
I'd say it's a combination of the two.
Right.
It depends a little bit on probably the size of the company, and if they're more in the younger buying group, they typically have done more homework and have talked to more people, just kind of the nature of what they're doing. They're looking at the bigger picture already, probably.
Right.
So they're taking that into account, and somewhere along the line, I hope they've probably at least done some thinking about, well, what will their potential exit be 20 years down the road as well.
Right. The Ron's far more qualified around this particular question probably than I am, but one of the things that we all are aware of, I think, is that a lot of purchases, a lot of mergers, acquisitions, they're normally acquisitions, tend to go wrong because of cultural problems. Is that something you get involved in at all, or
in general with the types of deals I do? Short answer is no. There has to be typically the buyer and seller have never met each other.
Right.
When they first get together, it helps if they feel that there's some common bonds there that they can relate to each other. So that's, I guess I'd call that a very low level cultural check.
Yeah.
Meeting some of the employees potentially, often the buyers will do some kind of a tour under the guise of, maybe a potential customer, or there's a whole list of fake identities, if you want to view it, that you have to come up with, because employees are smart enough to see visitors, and sometimes it seems as if they don't have enough to do, that they have to generate rumors. So you need to make it easy so that those rumors don't go anywhere, that this looks like a natural thing that's happening here. But in those tours as well, buyers typically meet some of the key staff people, that gives them some sense. And something as simple as just looking at what is the whether it's a manufacturing company or some other type of company, what does the business look like when you're walking through it, and how do people act? Those are, again, kind of subtle cultural things.
Yeah.
Not necessarily a checklist, but think most buyers consciously or unconsciously take that into consideration.
The undercover boss.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a version of it.
I would think, one of the most obvious cultural issues might come up when the two businesses are different, in terms of one's a family business and one's not. And whatever side each one is on, it's less matter. But those typically have a little bit different culture, just because of the way they've operated. And when those two come together, it can be a challenge on both sides. Is that have you had experience with those kind of?
Yeah, I think that's true. You know, a lot of, you know, when you say family business, that includes a whole very broad range of different animals. You know, you may have a husband and wife that, you know, technically that would be a family business. You may have, you know, a multi-generational family that, say, if they're in the third or fourth generation, you may have lots of family members. That's a much different animal than if you are basically in a first generation family business. But you know, that does have, you know, some impact, and there aren't, you know, unfortunately, the Census Bureau doesn't collect statistics on how many family businesses there are, and part of that is there's such a range of definitions of what a family business is.
Yeah.
That it'd take quite a bit of work to have some clear definitions before you try to do that survey. But most sources I've run into, and just my own personal experience, would say, you know, probably easily half of businesses fall somewhere within that spectrum of being family businesses. I saw a study a while ago that said 80 to 90% of businesses fall there. And if you just look at, you know, sheer number of businesses and not size wise, that could possibly be true that it's that high of a percentage if you're just thinking about husband and wife, or, you know, father and son maybe, or a couple brothers potentially.
I think there's some hybrids too that are on that spectrum where it may have been started by one generation, and maybe the next generation had sort of active participation. But then as you move through that, sometimes there's an expectation on the family side, either that the family members will go into the business, or on the other side that there'll be a place for me in the business always. And then along comes an acquisition, and, you know, there's rumors among the family.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Conversation Street. For more information or to schedule a private conversation with Success Authorities, email us at inquire@successauthorities.com.